Hello there, you're watching BrassTacks on CNN News 18. I'm Maha Siddiqui. The last 3 days have seen India battling an unprecedented crisis in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. A shortage of oxygen supplies to hospitals at this critical juncture. Over half a dozen hospitals went to courts with their plea of helplessness, asking authorities to act. The courts placed the responsibility with the centre to ensure the smooth movement of supplies if states were trying to withhold them. The centre, railways and armed forces are now in action trying to smoothen out the process. But what was blocking the supply? That's the lifeline at the moment for critical patients.
केंद्र सरकार, राज्य सरकारें, प्राइवेट सेक्टर सभी की पूरी कोशिश है कि हर जरूरतमंद को ऑक्सीजन मिले।
So what is the oxygen production in India and how is it being utilized at the moment? Why this shortfall? Let's try and understand all those factors at the moment. Presently, 7,500 MT is what is the oxygen production that is done in India. Now, 50,000 MT is important. Meanwhile, what we are looking at the moment is the allocation to the states, because that's where the demand is coming from, especially the states that are in critical need. 6,600 MT has been allocated to the states out of the daily supply that we've just pointed out. Meanwhile, supplies from steel plants are also being utilized. These are surplus supplies from steel plants, and industrial use so far at the current moment has been curbed. Looking at the critical situation, 75% supply is now for medical use only. Now, despite all this, what could be the factors behind the shortage that is being reported by several hospitals? Now, there can be several factors. First of all, many of the centers which are producing these oxygen, this oxygen rather, are far from the high demand areas. Now, for instance, if you take the example of Delhi itself, Delhi does not have a production plant. It is taking its oxygen supplies from Uttar Pradesh and Haryana. So, a shortage of cryogenic tanks can also create a shortage of supplies to other states. Uneven distribution in worst hit states could also create a crisis. For instance, in the state of Maharashtra, which has its own production, but even there we are seeing some hospitals complaining of shortage. Another factor that some are now pointing out too is perhaps the lockdown could have hampered the transport of these oxygen tanker supplies. But what exactly is it that has hampered the supplies to critical hospitals and states at this juncture? Because this was a foreseeable situation, and there should have already been a plan put in place to supply this kind of oxygen to hospitals, especially the COVID hospitals, where the stress could have been much more, as we are seeing at the moment. Let's quickly go across to our guests. First of all, Dr. Ajay Kumar, Congress spokesperson, is joining us. Zafar Islam, BJP spokesperson. We have Vikram Singh, who is the former Uttar Pradesh DGP. We have Dr. Amar Patnaik, BJD MP, and we also have Preeti Sharma Menon, the Aam Aadmi Party representative, here with us. Vikram Singh, I want to come first to you because the Delhi government directly blamed officials and the police of both Uttar Pradesh and Haryana in giving instructions to carriers of tankers of oxygen to not start their journey to Delhi. How is this even possible in a civilized society, in a democracy, that we are seeing states taking that decision and officials taking that decision when lives are at stake?
It's my painful duty to contradict the Honorable Chief Minister of Delhi. It is just not acceptable that these vague allegations are even possible today. In the days of this prompt media attention and the days of IT solutions coming your way and total transparency, obstruction by the state government machinery is just not possible, even if there some devious politician wanting to obstruct the passage of life-saving oxygen to Delhi. It is just not possible. It is not permissible, it is illegal, and I think both the governments will come down very heavily on all those elements. But I would say that what about the hoarding of essential drugs? The government should have intervened there also. The government should have anticipated the shortage of oxygen and should have ensured the PSA oxygen deployment machines in all hospitals, 100 beds plus. There is a lacuna between the demand and supply, but this allegation and counter allegations and playing politics, I'm sorry to say, right, politics is not Vikram my subject, but playing politics over the shortage of oxygen is just not acceptable.
I'll interrupt you, sir, because you're saying that you would want to contradict the Chief Minister of Delhi on the claim that he made yesterday. His deputy had actually made that claim. Manish Sisodia had said that. Now, let me read out to you. This is a notification by the Home Secretary from September 2020, 18 September 2020. It clearly says, point number 2, as you are aware, availability of adequate and uninterrupted supply of medical oxygen is an important prerequisite for managing moderate and severe cases. Point number 3, it has come to the notice that some states are trying to curb the interstate movement. This is on record by the Home Ministry, sir, not now, from September 2020. Despite that, 6 months have lapsed. What has the government done? Any of the government, state government or the central government? And here is a contradiction to what you just said, that the states will not hamper movement of oxygen. This has been noticed by Ministry of Home Affairs itself, sir.
Issuing directives by any MHA of the state or the MHA of any state, whether the central government or state government, does not absolve them of their responsibility. Issuing directives and circulars is one thing, and implementing them at the ground level. This is something very, very basic, and it should have been safe passage, should have been ensured.
Zafar
yes,
Islam,
there were reports, but if there were reports,
okay,
as a
Vikram Singh, I want to take a follow-up with Zafar Islam. Zafar Islam, would you come on that point now that, this directive was in place since September 2020? What was done over the last few months to ensure that when a crisis of this nature arrives, then the smooth supplies of oxygen are maintained?
Well, let me tell you very clearly that as far as the central government is concerned, we have had issued all the directives to the respective state government and the Honorable Chief Minister of Delhi, unnecessary friction within the society by making this kind of a irresponsible statement in what we should have done. He has not done. He has spent more money on advertisement. Just see his advertisement budget. It's medical infrastructure. He had sufficient time to create medical infrastructure. A single instance, what he was telling to the people of Delhi.
Ample arrangement made by the Delhi government. Everything is available. You need not worry. There is a government in Delhi who is creating medical infrastructure, and people of Delhi need not worry at all.
Okay. Preeti Sharma Menon, you want to respond to that? Because this is an allegation that has been made not just by... Just a second, Zafar Islam. Just a second, Preeti Sharma. Because R.P. Singh of the BJP, while speaking to us some time back, also pointed out that on the 17th of April, the Delhi Chief Minister had apparently told the centre that supplies are in place.
Yes. In fact, I would like to specifically speak on 2 points. Mr. Vikram Singh said that he would like to contradict the Chief Minister, but he did it without any data. We have data that the tankers, the distribution vehicles were stopped in Haryana by the bureaucrats and the police there, as well as in Uttar Pradesh. We've furnished this data with all seriousness. The Deputy Chief Minister has written to the central government about this obstruction. That's one. Point number 2, yes, if we had 380 metric tons at that time, it was sufficient for the use of Delhi. That supply was cut down when Haryana and UP stopped. They stopped around 150 metric tons from reaching Delhi. So we were in shortfall of the amount allotted to us. Next, the central government increased it. We said when we informed them that we think that the cases are surging and we need 700 metric tons, we informed them, they raised it to around 480. They raised it by some amount.
Just a second,
but we haven't got that
just
supply.
a second, ma'am. Ma'am, just a second.
If I may.
Ma'am, just a second. Just hear me out, ma'am. You are talking about the current situation of what was available last week and what wasn't available immediately after that, because Uttar Pradesh and Haryana, as per the Aam Aadmi Party government in Delhi, was obstructing those supplies. But there is always, when you see a surge, you do some strategy, some planning, you plan for the future, you foresee what can happen, and you demand an extra supply. Yes, I will come to you, Zafar Islam. What happened to that planning?
It's a good thing that you brought out planning. The PM CARES Fund, which got 3,000 crore rupees in 4 days, had allotted 200 crores, merely 200 crores, to make 150 new oxygen plants. Do you know that they did not even open the tender for 8 months? After the PM CARES Fund was started in March, for 8 months they did not even invite tenders. When they eventually invited and gave those tenders to date, not one of those plants is functional. So yes, planning has been abysmal. Producing oxygen and allowing oxygen plants is the responsibility of the central government. They have abysmally failed. They have not only failed in providing the oxygen to the states, but even planning for future production. So it is
that allegation can also be made against the state governments for not having strategized for what can happen, especially, just a second, Zafar Islam, for what can happen, especially in a state like Delhi, which is the national capital, where there are several people, who are coming in and out of the state, and therefore the propensity of the infection could be much higher. Let me go across to Ajay Kumar, then I'll come to Zafar Islam. Ajay Kumar, looking at the current situation, it is unfortunate that politics is still continuing over a matter which is so sensitive. At the moment, people are fighting for life and death. How would you categorize the response of the Congress party? Of course, there were some points that were raised which were not looked into. That is the point that the Congress has been making. But right now, shouldn't it be the responsibility also of the opposition party to pitch in wherever they can?
Look, Ma, first of all, continuing with what Preeti said and everybody else is saying, is that the government of India took over the oxygen distribution from March 2020. Before that, it was state, and the government of India set up an empowered committee, and I was in a call with a few health ministers of the Congress state health ministers. And they said that there has never been a meeting, a single empowered meeting with the state chief ministers.
So,
and the
Ajay
state
Kumar,
had,
as a responsible opposition, where were you all then when these meetings were not called?
Can I complete? Just because it needs a little amount of thinking, meditation. Yeah. So this empowered committee, who's supposed to supply oxygen, doesn't talk to any of the states, at least the opposition states. I don't know whether the BJP states have been spoken to. That's a fact. The fact is that the government of India is the only person who's deciding the production distribution. Which state can plan when the government of India and Mr. Modi and his 36-member or 6-member empowered committee is deciding the production distribution of medical oxygen from March 2020? The second issue, you want to know discrimination? Gujarat has 92,000 cases, and this is on record. Today's call with the Chief Minister, where the health ministers of Congress government said they gave 927 metric tons per day to Gujarat. To Rajasthan, which has got 1 lakh COVID active cases, they gave 108 metric tons. Now you tell me, this is a fact. This is told in the meeting with the Prime Minister. So which state will survive in this country when you have such dubious political leaders?
But at least the states are going to give their projection of how much oxygen, how much medicine, what are the critical requirements of every state. That has to be submitted, right?
You're not understanding. Mr. Modi exported that industrial, the nonsense they're saying on TV channels on industrial and medical. There is no difference between oxygen supplies for industry, steel plant. You can use it for medicine. I heard BJP spokesman continuously lying on TV, telling untruths on TV channels. The industrial oxygen, which is used on steel plants, is pure, 99.3%, which can be used for medical purposes. There is no difference. So they exported it.
Respond to all these
They exported it.
Let me respond to that. First of all, you have to understand and verify the total production and total demand. Despite the surge in demand, we still have 54% of the total production which the country has, and the country is producing oxygen. And both in terms of for industrial usage and for medical usage. It has been diverted for the industrial usage. Whatever has been allocated has been diverted for the medical usage, which has been because the demand has been surged suddenly. There is no scarcity. It is the logistic issue which has been sorted.
Just a second. If there is no scarcity, Zafar Islam, hear me out. There are people who are suffering, Zafar Islam, at the moment. Please hear me out. If there was no scarcity, and I'm taking your argument that there was no scarcity, there is still a shortage in hospitals. Why are we going on and on harping about the fact that there is no shortage of oxygen? That is not the question. The question is, why is it not reaching the hospitals?
Allow me to complete. Let me tell you that when the first lockdown was done, that time we didn't know anything about this pandemic. But now that we had sufficient time to create medical infrastructure, build medical infrastructure, and also ascertain what is your requirement.
As you rightly pointed out, we did not. 1 year and we have not done it. Sorry, Vikram Singh, I want to bring you in. Vikram Singh, I want to bring you in. Zafar Islam, I'll come to you. I'll come to you, Zafar Islam, because if we are going to go back into the past and talk about that, then there are several questions that can be raised against all the state governments and the central government. Vikram Singh, I want to come to you. Were we lax? And do we need to admit it today when so many lives are being lost unnecessarily?
May I submit with the greatest of respect to all governments, this is the worst possible time to hurl allegations and counter allegations. We did not draw our lessons in the last pandemic, and if we had pulled up our socks, drawn our lessons, we would not have cut such a sorry figure. And I apportion the blame to all without sparing anyone. It is not for me to blame, but the fact of the matter is, it is not child's play. That he didn't do it and she didn't do it, and he didn't give me the rubber and that gives me the pencil. The fact of the matter is that there's a huge dichotomy between demand and supply of the oxygen that's required.
All right. Okay, just a second. I'll go across to Amar Patnaik as well. He's been waiting very patiently. Amar Patnaik, under these circumstances, as Vikram Singh is also pointing out, unfortunate politics taking place over the issue. Naveen Patnaik has made a commitment that oxygen will be supplied smoothly to Delhi. Couldn't all these be implemented earlier and faster when we were already seeing that people were suffering on the ground, especially in states like Delhi, Uttar Pradesh and Maharashtra?
Yeah, actually, I would first tend to agree with what Mr. Vikram Singh was saying, except that in terms of preparation for this particular pandemic, I think all of us know, it's acknowledged that Orissa, led by Honorable Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik, has been best prepared for handling the second wave, handled the first wave pretty well. So it's not that Orissa has been at the receiving end, but what you were saying is actually suggesting is actually not right. Orissa offered from the own side. Honorable Chief Minister rang up Kejriwalji to ask if he needed, we will supply. And rang up the Prime Minister to tell that we would supply on humanitarian grounds. Talk to Uddhav Thackeray in Maharashtra. So it's not that we haven't planned, we have planned more.
That is not what I'm saying. Dr. Amar Patnaik, you're getting me wrong. That is not what I'm saying. My question is, when timing is critical, then shouldn't these factors have been taken into consideration before we reached a crisis situation? We had one long year.
I did say that somewhere along the way, we had time, we have been caught unawares. But we are not discussing one factor, that the surge in the pandemic, the surge in the positivity rates, the amount of time that the patients have to now stay in the beds, these are factors which were not known. So these have to be also factored in. I am not suggesting by any stretch of imagination that better planning would not have been possible.
Dr. Patnaik, I don't agree with it. Dr. Patnaik, there was a second wave. There was a second wave going on in the West. We knew that this virus can come back in a mutated diversion which can hit people harder. We have seen that happen in the UK. We have seen that happen in South Africa. We have also seen the situation in America, which is the richest country in the world, not being able to tackle the situation because they were not prepared. But they were not prepared 1 year ago. We had lessons to learn from that 1 year ago. We could have made all these preparations, thought through, thought ahead. We didn't do it. Preeti Sharma Menon, will you accept that?
I think somewhere all of us have to accept that we did not expect such a big surge and we did not prepare for it. But that does not condone or forgive the absolute lapses by the central government and the disparity that they're showing in treatments of different states. That cannot happen in a democracy. We are one country. We have to have one method of treating everybody the same way. Any demand, any supply has to be met on the basis of the number of people that are there in that city and how badly afflicted that city or that state is by the pandemic. Sadly, that's not what's happening. Sadly, we see that it's disproportionately being allocated, that there is no seriousness by the central government to even today when people are dying with a lack of oxygen.
Zafar Islam, would you want to comment on that? Do you think things can be rectified now, Zafar Islam?
See, the things have already been rectified. It is the responsibility of the state administration, with respect to whether it's a BJP or any other state. But it is the responsibility of every state to conduct whatever needs to be conducted to ensure that there is an adequate supply, there is no disruption in supply chain, something which needs to be done, which is being done. But more importantly, I just want to highlight one thing. There was sufficient time for Delhi administration and Delhi Chief Minister to at least ascertain what are their requirements, and they should have sounded it to central government. But just see 7 days earlier videos, we were fighting and we are telling that there are no beds available, and they were saying there is a app you can see and how many beds are available. Finally, they had to accept that beds are not available and the patients are being sent back. So today's situation has been rectified, the supply has been restored, and everything is working smoothly.
Okay, Ajay Kumar wants to come in.
We will ensure that it is being done.
All right, Ajay Kumar.
So Maha, the first question, the two main points. One is that the transportation of oxygen, if you know that it's transported in special vehicles, the government of India only a few days back gave a notification that the nitrogen trucks also can carry oxygen. So this is government of India handling the oxygen distribution, and this is how they're working. The surge has started 1 month back, and they have given a notification a few days back, which Zafar Islam Saab is saying about the transportation issue. The government of India does it. Second issue is the Prime Minister and the government of India is responsible wholly for and it's not politics. Vaccine shortage, vaccine mishandling, remdesivir shortage, remdesivir export mishandling, oxygen shortage, and this was the government of India handling all three. Remdesivir production by government of India was being handled, still is being handled. Oxygen is being distributed by government of India. Vaccine is being distributed and decided by the government of India. And you are telling me who is to be blamed? The country is asking that the Prime Minister and the government of India is a miserable failure. They have lakhs of people's blood on their hands.
Vikram Singh,
and now they're saying it's a state government.
I'll interrupt you there. We are running out of time. I want to go across to Vikram Singh. Vikram Singh, do you think that even the hospitals had not... Just a second, Ajay Kumar. Vikram Singh, do you think even the hospitals were not able to foresee the situation? If there were experts, medical experts who were being consulted, were they not looking at the situation across the globe? Were they not able to give definitive sort of a planning for future? Where did we go wrong?
I'm sure the fail-proof and the bulletproof planning that is necessary for these crises was totally missing. An investment of just around 2 crores per 100-bedded hospital, that was perhaps people were miserly not to invest those 2 crores for their own individual oxygen plants. And as far as Dr. Ajay Kumar is concerned, Dr. is a respected ex-former police officer and a politician of great repute. But I would say the criminal hoarding, the criminal black marketing at the state level, have we addressed that? We have not even addressed that at the state level. Therefore, let us not point fingers at each other. We need to introspect, cooperate, coordinate, and make the best of a very grim situation now.
On that note, I'll have to wind up this discussion. Certainly, your words is something that the governments across board should be noting at the moment that cooperation is most important at the moment rather than bickering over issues. Accountability also needs to be fixed, but probably that can be done a little later. We're taking a very quick break right now. Many thanks to all our panelists for joining us on the show. But before going into the break, here's a quick story. Vedika, a 9-month-old baby, has been diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy type 1, a serious genetic disorder that usually kills babies before they turn 2. It can only be treated with 16 crore rupees of medication that should ideally be given before her first birthday. The family is currently fundraising through Milap and have already raised 4 crores. Your small contribution can help Vedika get the cure at the right time. You can donate by visiting milap.org/Vedika.